my passion is to get the truth out there and to inspire others and tell what's happened since bringing this story out in 2016 and the journey that I've been on in the last 7 years, to show that no matter what and whoever or whatever, you've got to continue with your path and destiny, which you're set to do. And I feel this is my destiny. That's my inspiration right now.
I just wanted to start this episode with a message of thanks. Thank you to everyone that chooses to listen to this podcast. By doing this, you're enabling me to reach more people so that they might learn how to unchain the pain to live a healthier, happier life. The feedback that I get from those that take action and are inspired by the show's content is incredibly rewarding. So I'd like to ask you a teeny tiny favour. You are truly able to change the course of this podcast, the types of guests I have on this show, and everything that I do by doing one simple thing. And that is simply hitting the subscribing button. The guests on this podcast are incredible because so many of you have hit that button. When I think of what I want to do this year on this show, this is fueled by the amount of you that subscribe, that tune in, and that comment on the show's content. So please keep subscribing, keep commenting. Any type of comment, please keep them coming, and keep sharing the shows that you find inspiring. I can't wait to see what this year brings for this show, for you, for my community, and for this platform. Thank you. Today on Brain Health, Unchaining Your Pain, I am joined by the wonderful Andy Woodward. Welcome to the show, Andy.
Thank you very much for having me on.
Oh, no, you're most welcome. And I know we connected in a fabulous havening event in London where you shared your story. And I was just super fascinated and super proud of what you've been able to do in the context of sharing it. And I really was inspired by your presence there, actually, and your willingness to do the healing journey that was available to you through havening. So I'm really excited for you to share your journey with the listeners as much as you're able to, and us really to learn from your experience so that we can spread the message that you wish to share to the world, and how it's so important to speak the truth in order that others might prevent going down the difficult road that you went down. So I'm really looking forward to hearing your story. But before we start, let me just introduce Andy for those that don't know him. So on the 16th of November in 2016, Andy was the first ex-professional footballer to reveal child abuse in the sport. And this set a tidal wave around the globe and gave many people courage to speak out and openly talk about abuse and the effect it has on their mental health and the trauma it causes. So really looking forward to diving into this topic, because this is something that can so easily get brushed under the carpet, which I know many people have tried to do from your story.
Oh, yes, many.
You're certainly one person that likes to lift the carpet up and show all the dust that resides beneath, and bear everything open to the world. So before we start, I would love to know what you are passionate about in life right now.
My passion right now, and where I sit with everything that's happened in 7 years, is I've got that inner strength back in me to inspire others to understand the impacts of trauma, impacts of abuse, and how that can evolve throughout a lifetime, but inspire people to continue to speak truth and to be able to feel that they can let go of that, the trauma and the worry and the concern around being truthful about a past. And that can be in any kind of abuse. It doesn't have to be sexual. It just happens to be sexual with me. But my passion is to get the truths out there and to inspire others and tell my truths, what's happened since bringing this story out in 2016, and the journey that I've been on in the last 7 years, to show that no matter what and whoever or whatever, you've got to continue with your path and destiny, which you're set to do. And I feel this is my destiny. And that's my inspiration right now.
Do you know, I think that's so inspiring, because I think there's so many people who are afraid to speak their truth for the fear of judgment. And I know you've been on a huge journey of judgment. But it's so important, I think, in the context of the journey that a person goes on, to be able to talk about and be listened to the trauma that they've been on, and also to know they're not alone in that journey. They're not the only one. And we've had so many guests on the show who've been involved with, have experienced child abuse and sexual abuse, right back to Jess Lee was first on the show, first person who came on the show and talked about her abusive father and the trauma that she experienced. And it's getting that truth out is so key. So I'd love it if you could take me back to the time when you found that inner strength, if you will, to be able to speak your truth.
Yeah, I'd looking back 7 years, or it's longer than that, I'd kind of, I'm an intelligent person, and I'd kind of seen the what they call institutes, and those in power, and those that were controlling what was going on. And behind the scenes, I started to, I was having therapy at the time, and I was going through that therapy, and he turned around and said, you should write this down, because your story or your life is beyond anyone's recollection. And I just went on that journey, and I felt, I always have a saying that if your gut's telling you that you've got to do this, then I always go with my gut. And at that time, I knew that Barry Bennell was still in prison, out of prison, and I knew that he would never stop, no matter what. And it was, I spoke to Danny Taylor, and he'd written a couple of books, and he suggested that I did an article, and it was probably the most impactful night before of my life, because I was putting my whole life on the line, and my children's and my whole family. And I pressed the button the night before, and there it was on the front page. Wow. And when it went, it took everybody by surprise, because I'd even been to see the police at Cheshire Police and told them what I was going to do, and they actually laughed. They actually laughed at me.
Really?
Yeah, they laughed and thought I was just talking absolute rubbish. But I did forewarn them that, my truths, that people will listen and will see that everything that I said in the article was the truth. And it just spiraled from there. And that day, BBC Victoria Derbyshire contacted me. And, The Guardian were quite profoundly shocked by the amount of people that had viewed the page and were coming forward within the first couple of hours that it went live. So it was powerful and impactful. And it was a very, very, when they talk about fear, fear really did hit me in the face that night before, because I knew what I was setting myself up for.
Did you feel ready to manage the consequence of telling the truth, or was that something that kind of
Yeah, to be honest with you, Ruth, when I look back at it, and I do that quite often, and with any sort of impactive parts of your life, you do go back and you have that video and you have that, the initial thoughts. But I wasn't ready for the size and the magnitude of what was about to happen. And we never know, do we, what tomorrow is going to bring. What we do is we try and live in our todays, and when it was mind blowing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Could you just share your story to those that don't know it? What your story was that was released on the front pages of the newspapers and that made it to the BBC and beyond?
Yeah, from the age of 10, I started. I was brilliant at football as a child, and I was spotted for playing for Stockport Boys. And that man happened to be Barry Bennell. And then I started with training with City. And what he had this, he was not only a full-on paedophile, but he was a proper groomer. And he'd identify the parents and he knew the child as well. And he asked just in a few weeks, really, that I should stay at his house for the weekend and it'll better my football career. And I was only age 10. Back then it was not like it is now. And my parents put trust in him. And then he started to abuse me within a few weeks. And then that continued then for, it was 6 years in all.
Wow.
And that was every weekend, every day, pretty much. And I pretty much wasn't really at school an awful lot. And back then, the schools didn't have the reports like they do now. I was just AWOL, that I was I was poorly or, so it'd be days on end that he'd rape me. And it went on for 6 years. But within the midst of that as well, he also, he got my sister to clean his house, and she was only 14 years of age. And he told me and threatened me that it was more than friendship that they had. He actually threatened to kill me. And the fear back then, when you're 11 years of age, from 10, I was 13 at the time. He had not only had my career in his hand, but he had my life in his hands, and he knew that. And then he went on to have a relationship with her, and then had 2 children with her. So
and she was only 14 at the time.
At the time, when it first started, yeah. So what this shows is the impact that these paedophiles can have, not only on a child, the innocent child, but also the family. And my mum and dad, the most loving, caring parents. And what adds to that as well is that, and I do believe that, sometimes we have our path in life and we're born into this world for, sometimes some people seem to have a life that takes them down a certain track. But before I was born in 1971, Barry Bennell's cousin murdered my mum's sister. And that was before I was born.
Wow.
So that family, in terms of when they talk about, the dark and those that do evil things to people, it's like it was instilled in their family gene, because his cousin had done that to my mum's sister. And then he went on to do, knowing full well what his cousin had done to my family. Obviously, initially he didn't obviously know that, but after a period of time he did. So it was 6 years of rape.
Wow.
And that didn't stop, because he then I went into a YTS, which is when you go into your apprenticeship through, and lo and behold, he'd never done it before, and he ended up looking after my team, because he was completely obsessed with me. And that, the abuse stopped when I was 16.
Right. Okay.
But he still had that control over me.
And obviously during that period, you know, your brain is still developing, and hugely vulnerable emotionally during that developmental period, and obviously physically abused and mentally abused, emotionally abused, and also spiritually abused in terms of your outlook on life completely shifted. You know, football was your passion, and now it became your prison.
Yes.
You know,
really did.
Yeah, and just reflecting back on 10-year-old Andy, thinking back, you know, as an adult now, maybe if you wouldn't mind, what do you remember really shifted in you? Because obviously you were really in the thick of this horrific experience that was constant. To being a, you know, if you were to think about the signs that you were exhibiting to your parents that they were maybe not aware of, or society was not aware of, teachers weren't aware of, what were the huge shifts in your behavior before 10 to 10 and beyond? Or did you manage to mask it, just, you know, for the parents and the carers out there?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing with me is, you know, when I look back to Andy of 10, I've gone back behind that, and I was always energetic, always smiling, always happy. But what definitely shifted was my fear, and I think the fear that he put in me, I became more withdrawn, or wouldn't really want to engage in other people. And I had also had issues at school where, you know, there was bullying, you know, with me because I'm quite dark skinned, and with all that going on, I think what I did is I had to survive, but I withdrew within myself, in my own mind, and I knew I had to keep quiet but continue with what. And also as a child, you want to do your parents proud. And when you want to do them proud, and knowing what he was doing to me was wrong, I was locked in a prison, like you said. But I didn't want to let them down, and I couldn't speak to them about what was happening, because my mum even asked me questions when I was 12. You know, is everything okay? Are you okay? You know, and when you're at that age, that fear is so deep that the actual uttering those words is something that, because, you know, his power over me was, he wasn't violent all the time, but he'd certainly show now and again. And he had nunchucks, and he had, you know, Chinese stars, and he'd have me standing there and throwing Chinese stars at my head. You know, he then showed his power over me as a child. So there was nothing and no way that my brain could, as a child, function enough to be able to speak out, because it was ultimate control over me.
And if you were to be given a way out as the child that you were then, what would have helped you escape the prison that you were in, if you were to reflect back on that today?
I think the biggest thing that for me, looking back on it all and that era, we can't turn back time, can we? But
no.
there was nothing in place to give any. There was no education about it. There was no talk about it. I'd say within my period of life, I'm 50 now, but around that time, I do know, because I've spoke to thousands and thousands of people, you know, that era of life really did affect the world. And there's many people that aren't with us anymore. And there's many people that are suffering with all different types of mental health illnesses. I think the key thing was that you, as a child, I had nowhere to turn. It was nowhere. There was nobody. And I think that loneliness, I think a lot of people that have gone through that within those decades, will all say that they just didn't feel they could turn to anyone. And anyone that did was completely ignored and shut up.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I know of many that have tried to speak out as a child back then, and it was shut down. It was the biggest taboo.
Yeah, I mean, we had the huge Savile scandal, didn't we?
Yeah.
Which blew up massively and made people realise the extent of abuse that can go under the radar for decades.
Yeah.
You know, unfortunately, you were a victim of yourself with another paedophile, and it happens to people who are seen as professionals in the community, as it were.
Yeah.
And therefore not seen as somebody who might do that.
Yeah, I mean, over my journey of the last 7 years, I said at the very start, I knew within the football world that there was a ring of paedophiles.
Yeah.
Even though they didn't have internet, they were in touch with each other because we used to go to all the same cups, and there was many coaches that were all part of a ring. And you know, the last 7 years, I've done a lot of, you know, when you say about putting a jigsaw puzzle together, the puzzles all fit, and it's just been this path that I've been on and sent on that I you know, categorically would say that there is a ring of steel in this world, not just in this country, that are protecting those in power that still or have done wrong to children. And that is being exposed as we speak every day. But what I did, you know, it went around the world, it went around the globe. I've done every magazine you can think of in different countries, in America, in South America. But they didn't want that to go the path that I wanted to take it. They were not going to allow that.
And if you just take us on that journey where you exposed the truth and you told the truth and lifted the lid on the paedophile pot, and you developed a film for it, didn't you? Your own story, documentary.
I did. You know, initially at the start of the journey was not to, you know, it was never about anything, no ego, no greed, it was just purity to expose what these people do to humanity. And, you know, on that road that I was on, you know, I got targeted, I got attacked, and, you know, I had trolls that went to prison for 12 months. But on that journey, that initial journey, I started to see that, you know, with myself, that I stood up to them. And many victims came forward, or survivors, that were all, as they say, implicit on trying to please those in authority and agreeing with, you know, and going down compensation routes, you name it. But because I stood up to those at the very top and said to them, you are wrong, and I will expose this in the future, and I will continue. It's my, you know, I did all the interviews on TV and I said all these things. Looking back on it, was it the right thing to do? Yes, I stand in my truths. I've paid a huge cost for that, a massive cost to my life. But I did make a film, and I wrote a book. But even with that, you know, the book was edited massively for those reasons. The film was stripped down for those reasons. And I've actually been in those institutes, as they call, you know, your BBCs, the FA, the PFA, the football world. And when you've been at the very top of that and you can physically see it yourself, it's interesting to know what actually is going on. But, you know, the film Floodlights, they took that down after 12 months. And, you know, now they refuse to give me a copy of it, which is, you know, it's a story about my life, and my family were in it. My mum and dad, you know, were in the film, obviously actors, but, you know, I still can't, and they won't They don't return calls by the people that have helped make it. Even the director, it's like it's disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that was purely for humanity, to show people the impact, because a visual film, when you watch a film, it does impact on people, and you can also see that the developmental side of it as a child, and the grooming process, and the effects and damage it has on somebody's life. And that was the purpose for making it.
I think it's also really important to bring awareness to children,
Yeah.
without, instilling the fear of them that they could, they can't ever talk to an adult.
Yes.
But it's what I think's really important is for kids is to make them aware of when
Yeah.
it's not okay, when an adult's
Yes.
behaviour is not okay.
Yes.
Unfortunately, we now have Childline
Yeah.
that kids can call, and there's a whole multitude of other
Yeah.
helplines. But it's getting that intervention, isn't it, early?
Yes.
When a child they're threatened. Of course, every child gets threatened with the fear of death most of the time, that they'll have something will be, harm will be done to them, or harm will be done to their family. But to give them a way out and know that harm won't happen with the appropriate intervention.
Yeah. And that is key, and when I did do what I did, and I was working and collaborating with a lot of people in this country that were on the same sort of wavelength as I was. But when you're trying to implicate that within institutes, they completely just shut me down.
Mm-hmm.
And that was part of my, path to, because when you can educate a child and not put them in any fear, but just to make them aware and deliver that at different levels, because the brain develops at different times, as we know. There is many, people that have suffered abuse from the age of 4 to 6, per se, that know that something happened, but can't put the finger on exactly what happened. And I've met many people like that as well, where they're traumatized by it, but they can't actually picture exactly what happened, but have been on the same path of life, identical to my path of life.
Yeah.
So there is something there where obviously the brain can't, at that age, it can't function as you get older. You see, my memory of it from the age of 10, I can remember everything.
Mm-hmm.
But those that I've spoken to from the age of 4 to 6, they knew something had happened, but couldn't picture that. But giving that, those talks to children at a level where they can see somebody in like myself that has gone through that trauma, but not put any fear in that child. Because once you put fear in a child, that fear sits in the brain.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard for them to actually then, they will feel the fear of, oh, well, I can't say something. I'm frightened of this. And it's giving children and educating children to have no fear, because the world's full of fear, and we see it every day, don't we? And children are exposed to stuff on the, the news, you name it. It's everywhere. The internet, it's and that's something that I'm passionate about, because that's where it starts as a child. It starts.
I agree, and I'd love for you to explain all the layers that you uncovered, because this show is not edited. This show, we love to speak the truth. It's all about taking the boo out of taboo, so we can have a thanks very much for the next person in the generation. So I'd love if you could explain, when you exposed the truth and the paedophile, Barry, and then what you uncovered throughout the layers of the organisation that allowed his behaviour to continue under the radar, or in their radar, but not actually doing anything about it. Would you be willing to share?
Yeah, and you know what is truth, and you know it because I wasn't, when I said I wasn't prepared for the magnitude of it, but I was determined to not stop. I did that many interviews, including CNN. I was on everything, and I knew in my brain, in my intelligence side of me, that if I took this to a level and it went that big, they couldn't brush it under the carpet and make it go away. So I did all that. But within that, I think what those in authority, like the FA, which my true beliefs are that they're all linked together. They are all linked together, the institutes in this country and the world. But they invited me in, and their invitation, I know now, was to bring me in there to show the world's media that they were looking at this seriously. They were going to, you know, make a change, and they were going to listen to what I had to say, because they were all outside, all the media, the whole lot. They were lined up outside Wembley, and I came out, and they told me and assured me, Greg Clark, and you know, that started to change within a short period of time. And I knew then, and I thought to myself, they are playing what they do best, and that's covering up and making it not go away, but show we are doing something. So you know, they set up the ISPCC chat line, and they did this and they did that, and I was working hard in the background, and I was trying to come up with a holistic solution around not just in any sport or anything with those in power, that you know, it's not just about the child, it's also about those that have suffered and those that have mental health issues, etc., etc. And like me at the time, I had trust in them, and I handed it to them, and they turned around and said, no, it's not for us, thank you very much. And the reason they did that is because myself, knowing my truths, and they knew that I wouldn't stop. They didn't want.
Who said it's not for you? Sorry, Andy. Who said that?
It was the FA, the PFA, Premier League, and I gave it to them. And you know what I noticed straight away was that they were on a mission themselves to pretty much silence me and shut me down. And Greg Clark spoke in Parliament. The next minute, I'm speaking to Tracy Crouch, who I knew, and she said, he said, I'm coming up from London straight away, because I did an article in the Telegraph to oppose what he said in Parliament. And he told Tracy Crouch he was going to give me a role within the FA. And I said, great, because that's what I want to do, make a difference. I'm an honest person, and I want the truth. Mm-hmm. And then he turned around and said, no, I'm sorry, Andy, I can't. And it went on that, because I even felt then that I'm solely taking on something far more powerful than what I am and who I am. Even though the story went so big around the world, one person can't change an organization or change an institute or stop them from doing what they want to do, and they will do. Mm-hmm. So I did learn that, Ruth, over the last 7 years, and I've had it tough, you know, really tough because of that. And they did shut me down, and you know, those that are responsible for that, and I'm not quite there yet to actually find out.
Oh, just lost you. Down.
Yes, you know, in different.
Hang on, let me do that again. Okay. Because I don't think it picked me up. So, oh, hang on a minute. It's trying to pick up my thing on my phone. Get off there. I was typing a message to you. Right. So they did shut you down.
Yeah. And I took over the 7 years, there's been several different things that have happened, and I'm going to write about it, and I'm going to speak my truths, because I will write another book. The book that I wrote, Position of Trust, it'll be Position of Trust betrayed by many people. I set a foundation up at the very start, near the start of it, and that was purely to help. And I had a vision, and I had the whole world's press there, everybody at the Midland Hotel in Manchester. And within I think it was about 6 weeks, I'd gone, and I said to 2 other victims that I was willing for them to be involved in it, because I felt for them and they were going through pain. Do I rue that day? Yes, I do, because whatever happened, I ended up being in Scotland to do a talk, and then a few weeks later, I've not heard off anyone, and my mum had seen it, and they've removed me from the foundation for no fault of my own, nothing, and it was myself that had done it. And looking back on that now, I don't know who was responsible and why, but if you can get every press from all over the world being at a launch, then you become quite a powerful person. And I think they saw that what my vision was, and it was, no, he's not going to do that. And it was stripped off me. I didn't make it public because there was a lot of cases going on at the time with, and I wasn't going to interfere with justice that needed to be served. So I didn't say anything to anyone. And, I've mentioned it a few times in a couple of podcasts I've done. But, it's things like that I look back on. But it's given me an education. And I think, my destined path is to reveal and speak my truths, and, tell people. Even recently, Ruth, I've tried to speak out, and the mainstream journalists, they don't want to touch me. The reason behind that, I know why the reason is. So I've had a tough road, but they're not going to stop me in my tracks of speaking truthfully about this hidden ring of steel that they seem to be, barricading themselves in right now. You see it in the news around the world every single day. There's more about sex trafficking, and, the institutes and those involved and those in power, and those people are being exposed everywhere now.
It's huge, sex trafficking is huge. And to be people that think that there are, modern slavery, which includes sex trafficking, it is rampant. And the UK is one of the worst locations for it. And it needs to be exposed, because if we don't expose the extent of the trafficking, the extent of the sexual abuse that goes on at an organizational level, where you, like you say, you do have this ring of steel, then how can parents trust putting their children into activities where they can be confident that their child isn't going to be sexually groomed? And this comes that, this isn't just football, because I know it's happened for people who have been friends of mine in other industries that look after children, because isn't it a fertile ground for the paedophiles to groom children? And if you don't have the safeguards in place, and even if you do have the safeguards in place, you need to create a ring of steel for the children.
That's
not
it.
For You've the paedophile.
Absolutely. And that needs turning on its head, because throughout generations, it's been the ring of steel for the paedophiles, and the children have been literally destroyed. And there's too many people that, you know, could have lived a longer life that are no longer here because of those rings of steel, that they felt it is okay to abuse children around the world. Well, it's not okay. And I'm an example of, you know, the life sentence that you're given, you know, in the brain of trauma and PTSD. I've been diagnosed with every single one of them. But with that, I want to show that even with that life sentence, there are people here, including yourself, Ruth, and others that, you know, are collaborating together to make a difference in this world and have a voice and speak truths and not be shut down by those that felt that they owned the world. But unfortunately, the world is changing, and that battle that they've sort of cemented and put the steel around, you know, there's no coincidence why there's a square mile in London, there's a square mile in Washington, etc. That protection and that ring of steel is where they feel or felt more powerful than any other human. And it's wrong, because children are born into this world to have peace and harmony. And there's never been balance before. And there should be balance, because why should people suffer for greed, ego, for whatever gives them gratification, whether it's physical, you know, sexual, emotional, or whatever. Children need protecting, and it's about time that they were.
And I think, you know, going back to your point, when you're a child, if you experience sexual abuse of whatever nature from whoever it happens to be, like you mentioned, children can't communicate what is going on easily, because they either don't have the language to communicate it, and they can't communicate it in a way that an adult understands, or they have been so have so much fear instilled with them that even if they can't speak about it because they're terrified.
That's it. Yeah.
And I think, you know, what people seem to forget, when you grow up, you're still that child that is terrified. You're still the child that can't speak about it because you didn't have the maturity in your brain to be able to understand what's going on. And I think reflecting back on some experiences that I've had, I didn't fully understand what had happened to me until I became an adult, because I didn't have the mental maturity to know what was going on. And it isn't until you see it in the media, like the Jimmy Savile, like your story, that you maybe as an adult think, do you know what, what happened to me as a child, I now understand that really wasn't right, because you may have compartmentalized it, and you know, to get to cope as your coping mechanism, you package it up, you put it as far away as possible from your mind, and you hope nobody will ever open the lid. That's the way you deal with it. But what happens is you go through life and you start to learn that packaging in and passing it and putting it away doesn't actually make it go away. Actually, what happens is because you have emotionally, physically, mentally, and spiritually parceled it up, your body needs to release that stored energy that it's had to contain because of the trauma. And you witnessed the release of your stored energy when you had your session recently, because we store it up, because we can't do the escape, we can't fight, we can't flight in the way that our body would naturally want us to do at the time that trauma happened. And then you stack it, and it just grows into this enormous mass inside your system of unhelpful stored
Yeah.
energy that leaks out in different ways, because our body has to get rid of it somehow. And
Yeah.
it may leak out in anger. It may leak out in shitty relationships. It
That's
may
right.
it may leak out in not be able to have any relationships. It may leak out in addictions, because that's your
right.
coping mechanism. So many different routes out that it takes. But the source is what we need to help address and help people get a kind release, and also to understand, I think, when you're sharing your story, is we kind of think it's an adult sharing their story, but it's you telling your story that you had as a child. It's sharing that child's pain, that child's suffering. And I think sometimes the media and the society forget that you're looking at a really scared, hurt child that is trying to help other children not go through their same experience. And it may be you're now in an adult's body because you've grown up, but ultimately the trauma happened during your childhood years, and it gets encoded in a child's mind. And it's really hard.
It is, and
Really
it's exactly what you said there, Ruth. As you were talking about that, when I think back to when I spoke to the police, he'd been arrested in America, and it was 1997, and the police were hounding me, and I was a professional footballer, and my football was going really well, but my nephew was 8, and I knew he was going to come back and abuse him. He'd been in prison in America. So I had a decision to make, and my decision was to save his life. And I knew something would happen to me. You keep that stored, like you say, and you've locked it away, and you've not been able to. And there's many times people will associate with this as well. It's like, throughout my life, it's always been difficult to say no. Because that saying no is like, or sometimes speaking, I do now, but for many years, if anything happened, I used to just keep my mouth shut, and I'd want to talk. I want to say something, but it has stopped me. And that was
your coping mechanism.
Absolutely, yes.
Your survival mechanism.
That's it. So when I did do that in 97, and the horrible police just took a statement and then never spoke to me again, and I still to this day don't know what he was sentenced for back then, but he went to prison. But it took 18 months for me to start with panic attacks. And I know after many years of researching, reading books and how the mind works, that was a prolonged stage of trauma releasing itself slowly and slowly and slowly. And then eventually my body just went bop, and the flight or fight and the panic disorder. I was a professional footballer. They didn't really talk a lot about it then, Ruth. And it was like, you just had a panic attack. Well, what's a panic attack? I ended up losing a few stone in weight because I didn't know. So that ruined my football career. But, linking with that, with trauma, what I learned from that for many years of therapy and different readings of books. But I know with what's happened to me in 2016, it's been an unbelievable roller coaster of horrible events that have happened. Now I'm suffering the trauma from what has happened over the last 7 years to me. And at least I'm equipped to know what's going on, that I understand that it does take a bit of time for that trauma to actually hit you. And that's, the havening and, my mechanisms is getting me through that. And I will come through the other side, and then I'll be free from that trauma, because they won't do it again to me, what they've done, because they literally, destroyed me, and they knew I was suicidal. They did nothing. And I'm talking about the BBC. They all knew what was going on with me.
Yeah.
And it was like, no, it was horrific. But I was just showing you those things, how it takes that bit of time, and you think, oh, I've done it now, I've got it off my chest. But it can take a period of time before that trauma actually hits you.
Yeah, because you have to compartmentalize it to
Yes.
cope.
Yeah.
And it
100%.
isn't until I think you find there's a safe space in time and place.
Yeah.
That your body gives you authority to release.
Yeah.
Because it's
100%.
like, if we experience an attack by a lion, you're not gonna go, oh phew, just as the lion has left.
No, it is so true.
You're not going to go, oh, thank goodness he's just walked into the bushes, I'll be all right, and I'll just have a complete release, because you're still vulnerable.
Absolutely.
And so you absolutely have to, not absolutely, but we often have to have this period where our body suddenly at some point realizes it's okay to release. It's okay to release this energy because I'm in a safe place and time.
Yes.
Or I absolutely have to release this energy, irrespective of whether it's safe or not, because otherwise my body is going to shut down because there's too much energy stored from the unreleased from trauma. And I think people, going back to people's responsibility, I think one of the challenges that we continue to face with mental health is it's always pointed towards the person as being at fault, rather than the system causing the disorder that we experience in our mind, because there's disorder in society and our mind is trying to create order out of disorder.
Absolutely.
And in the process, it can't do it because it can't make sense of it, and it can't deal with the consequences of the extreme disorder that we're exposed to. And I think their organisations have an accountability, and whether this is the organisations you mentioned, but businesses as well.
Absolutely.
Every organisation has a accountability and responsibility in the context of how they engage with people and how they influence somebody's health and well-being. Whether you label it mental health, whether you label it brain health, but you can't behave in a disordered manner to a person and not be responsible for the consequences of that behaviour and wash your hands of it. And I don't think we look at the system enough and the impact of the system on the person, because we're all connected. And you would never have had the experience if it wasn't for a disordered system, which included a paedophile. It wasn't you. It was the other person that caused you.
And this is one thing that I've always said to people, in any trauma or any sort of, whether you're, in a relationship I know a lot about narcissistic behaviors because I've been in those sort of situations. But no matter what it is, that kind of abuse, the trauma is what sits in there is the fear overcomes everything. And society is that those people in power with their greed and ego, it's like a pyramid system at the very, very top. It's too big that you could even quantify. But as that goes down, even those in those positions are not, or a vast majority, not all, but a vast majority, the greed and ego overcomes the empath. And there's many people out there that are empathic, like you and I and others. And I do feel that the empaths are coming out and they're starting to have a voice, because we can't be treated the way that those in power feel that they can treat another human being. There has to be some balance. And that's one thing that, I watch it and I see it, Ruth, and I just think, this is unfair to humanity. the control and the greed and the ego. And that goes right through the board and right the way through to children. And it's that's, it's just so wrong.
Knowing what you know now, and through your life experience, I always love to ask this question: what is optimal brain health for you personally in the context of your life's journey?
I think optical sort of like, I think for me, because what I've had a spiritual awakening. Mm-hmm. And I think the mind, what I've learned at my optical height is when I've learned recently about the balance of the science of the brain and the spiritual energy of us. And the energy that runs through us isn't just made up, it's known. The frequency and the currents that run through us from the universe. But what I thought, and I was dealing with it just on a spiritual level, so the meditation, the going in nature, by a tree, all those things were helping me on the journey that I've been on in the last couple of years and bringing me through that. But I identified that even with that spiritual, that the scientific side of the brain and understanding about the trauma in the amygdala and how it all works, there's the balance. And I think that's what, when I'm at my optical best, is when I've still dealt with these recent traumas in the last 7 years, because I've dealt with Barry Bennell. That does not affect me, albeit I still have flashbacks. And the hardest thing as well is what I meant to say to you before is, hardest thing isn't anything from addiction to whatever it is, abuse, you name it, is the acceptance. Once you accept it's happened and it wasn't your fault, is the starting blocks to recovery or getting to where you want to be in life. And I think that's the hardest thing. But when you ask that question, that's what my goal is now, to optimize myself. So I do the Scientology around the brain and removing that trauma, the recent trauma, and stay on my spiritual path as well. And that then gives you balance. And that's what at my optical best is when I'm balanced.
I think that's so important, because I think so often we just look at one thing and not the other. So we might just focus purely on how can I get rid of the trauma? And what modality is appropriate. And often it takes us a long time to find a viable modality, as I know you've been on that journey, because there's a lot of terrible therapists out there.
Oh, I've seen many.
So it's finding that path, which is really hard, by the way. And havening is a fantastic modality, and this is a whole separate podcast to talk about that. But the other piece is connecting with your spirit.
Yes.
The thing that helps you get up in the morning, the thing that makes you, the thing that helps you connect with the good parts of the world and helps you shield yourself from the bad parts of the world.
Absolutely,
it's the field that sits around you. It's the field that you dissipate into the earth when you ground yourself, the field that you give to the tree when you hug the tree. And we're all connected. We all exhibit an energy field. We all exhibit an emotional state, because dogs pick up, by the way. That's why we have
100%
dogs that help us.
That's right.
And I think we forget the importance of the spiritual element of our cognitive health, our brain health, with what often is the core focus, and not necessarily the right focus, depending on the therapy, is trying to help you deal with the trauma in the right way that's right for you, and getting you back into that state of balance where you can go, okay, that happened to me and it wasn't okay, but now I'm in the state of balance, and now I'm in that state of balance, and I'm not being yanked back all the time to the past like I'm on a bungee cord and it keeps pulling me back. I can now move forward because I've snipped those cords and cut them, and I'm free.
Right. And literally that is, it's cutting those cords and being free. And there's no perfect human being out there. But if you endeavor yourself to be as balanced as you can in your decisions, in your heart, in your soul, in your chakras, in your spirit, in this world, then the world will be a nicer place for all humanity. And I know my destiny, and I had this spiritual awakening which was profound. But by learning this now about the science element, like you said, it's given me that lift now, that moving forward, I don't have to look back at the recent 7 years. I'll feel empowered in my own body and my mind and spirit to be able to deliver then, and be strong enough to be able to deliver to others, to inspire others that this is my journey. And this is many people's journey that have all been on. We're all on a journey of life, aren't we? But, to share that with others and to inspire people is something that, I'm really sort of destined to do.
And I think that empowerment is so key,
Mm.
because if we are able to empower our children
Yes.
to know how to escape from somebody that is not doing things that are appropriate to them, and they are empowered to do that, and they have the courage to do that, they know this is not okay, and I know I'm going to be safe when I speak my truth. And if we empower people who have experienced trauma, like yourself, who are adults and they've got years, and your trauma didn't just end at 16, because you had the trauma when you spoke your truth.
That's right.
And all of the trauma in between.
Yeah. Which was a lot. But it's like now, I've started repairing a lot of my trauma. And when I talk about my spiritual experiences, I've joined a team called a Lucid Child Protection Unit, and they catch paedophiles online, because that is one of their biggest weapons, the online social media. And we go and catch them, and it's an amazing group of people, and the police are supportive, etc. But what was ironic is the first one we did, it was 400 meters from Barry Bennell's video shop he had when I was a child. Wow. The second one we did was at Sheffield, at the hotel that I stayed in 99, 2000, when I was really poorly. The third one was at Halifax, where I lived with Kelly, which you know about, and also my final club. And the fourth one was at Crewe Alexandra, right outside Gresty Road, where it was just after Barry Bennell had died in prison. So those 4 separate places that we went to was the universe putting a light on a dark past. And 1 or 2 is a coincidence. 4 of them is more than a coincidence. So, I felt a freedom when I went back there to catch a paedophile who was grooming a child, and then see him get arrested and put away. It's cathartic, and it's this team that we are working together in collaboration, because the police's resources, they can have files there for months on end. I know too well myself, and these victims out there that are still being groomed online. So that's another part of my cathartism, to get freedom.
I love that. And I think what I find, when you've been through trauma, you spot it. You sense it. It's like your sixth sense, isn't it?
It is literally.
You sense that something isn't right. If it doesn't feel right, it probably isn't right.
No, that's right.
And I think one of the important elements of breaking these rings of steel and empowering our kids to have their own rings of steel is educating the general public.
Absolutely.
As to noticing when something isn't right, and having that sixth sense as to the environment. You know, don't just assume everything's okay because you're in a top class organization.
Yeah.
Because often it isn't okay, and it's
it.
You know, having that voice and empowering people at every level to be able to do what you're now doing, which is speaking up and uncovering it. Andy, what advice would you give to anybody who has been through the child abuse and is really scared of speaking their truth and the consequences that come of it?
It's a difficult one because, you know, when it comes down to the system and the way the judicial system is in this country, there's a lot of fear about being able to. I think that there's a lot of fear lost with what I did and others speaking their truth, especially in men, or men, woman, whoever, child. I think that the biggest key to it is if it's their own personal decision. Some people want to sit with it and don't want to speak out. And, you know, I always have a saying, you know, it's okay to not prosecute someone if you don't feel that you have that strength to go through that process. The main thing is report it and you know your own truth. Because if you know that you've done that, you don't want to go anywhere with it. But if you know your own truth, you are believed. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And it's being believed that this happened. And I always say to anyone that I speak to around this, it's such a difficult subject to actually say and give advice to, because there's many out there that advise people speak out. You've got to talk. You've got to speak your truth. Well, there's a devastating impact on actually speaking out, because, you know, I know that myself. And it's about getting the help, and that's where, you know, like you said about therapists, you know, there's many bad ones out there, but there is some good. And the techniques that, you know, you can talk about the havening, and there's some wonderful things out there, but it's having that acceptance and letting go. And the problem is that at the moment with the NHS, it can take so long for somebody to even see somebody. So releasing that burden is a big, you know, it's a big thing for anybody.
Yeah, I agree. And it helps you get on with your life as well.
Yeah, and you know, the biggest thing is for me is just, you know, your own gut, and you know your own self, whether you feel strong enough to go through with the process in this country, because, you know, it is wrong. Victims shouldn't be having to wait a long period of time. They should be dealt with there and then and done and sentenced. If the evidence is there, the evidence is there. If it's not, it's not. But this causes so much trauma to victims when they let it out and then can be sat there for nearly 2 years waiting for a trial, a conviction, and it's not right. So it's hard one for me to advise, because it's a person in here that knows whether they can.
No, I think that's great advice, because I think often people feel they have to, because they're kind of driven, but actually psychologically or physically they can't. And that's okay.
It is,
that's completely okay. And, you know, another way to express what's happened to you is through stories like yourself. And to say this really resonated with me, but I can't talk about it.
And that's okay. But if it gives comfort to others, and, you know, I've had thousands of people when I've done my talks in the past, and I'll do them again. But that inspiration of being able to me deliver that to others, and then them come up and speak to me about it happened to them. And I think by the inspiring of others, even if they're not strong enough to go to the police, they're being heard. And it's that knowing that actually I'm believed. It is, the truth is the truth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's so important. I think also the fact that you don't have to speak and relive your experience in order to get relief from your trauma.
No.
Is so often we kind of get pushed down this therapeutic approach where you have to regurgitate everything that you did, and you don't have to, and sometimes that can make things worse because you strengthen the very neural networks that you want to snip.
Absolutely. And there is wonderful techniques out there and different, I'm an advocate of, what works.
Yeah.
There's many things that don't work. And I'm an example of that. I had 20 odd years of going over it, therapy, medication, therapy. There is amazing people in this world that are doing amazing things. But I think a lot of it is shut down and a lot of it is stopped because of those in power. But, it's a difficult taboo, and I've got lots to sort of like say about it. And it's there's certainly some wrong people out there.
Yeah, well, I look forward to reading your next book.
Yeah,
and hearing some more truths and hopefully supporting more people in knowing how they can protect their kids. Because I think for me, ultimately, this is about protecting the children of the future and helping the children of the past unchain their pain.
Yes, and they run hand in hand. And that's what it is. It is protected. That's exactly pretty much verbatim what I said at the start when I broke the story. This is about protecting children so they don't have to suffer a life like those like myself that have. But we can inspire them to have that voice, but also inspire others that have gone through that they are all part of a collaboration of people that understand each other, that are empathic, victims of those in power taking advantage of a child. That should be stopped. And exactly what you said there, Ruth, that's the future, and that's what we will do.
Yeah. And how can people, if they're concerned about there may be a paedophile ring, shall we say, in their local community, they're concerned about certain behaviours of individuals. You mentioned the organisation, which is the Elusive Child Protection Unit. How can they get hold of that, or obviously phone the police, report it?
The first bout of call is always, I always say, report it to the police and make sure they take a log number down. And secondly, if they don't get any response, then call back to speak to somebody in authority. Because there's too many times in these communication centres where they get fobbed off and the log will just disappear. Well, it shouldn't disappear, because if anybody is concerned about an individual or a group or anything like that, they should be heard by the police, and they should listen to what's being said. If that turns out to be negative, then at least that person or those people have made that report. Always report it. But if the problem is in this country, is a lot of people I know I've spoken to, I was in the police. The problem is it just gets logged and people go, right, well, they've done nothing about it yet again. Well, find them accountable for why they haven't done something about it, and ask to speak to somebody in authority. And lo and behold, somebody will speak to them because they have to, and it's been logged.
Yeah.
So I'd say just that perseverance to step it up a ladder if they're just being ignored.
Yeah, I agree. And, although completely unrelated, is I spotted an abnormal behaviour of somebody careering down the road at a very fast speed in a car that wasn't very well marked, and immediately phoned the police. And then a couple of days later, They phoned me back and said, really, thank you, because your action as a member of the public helped us catch the criminal who'd just been robbing something. So if you notice something is not right, it probably isn't. So phone the police, because you never know that, this is a web. Paedophile rings are webs of individuals, and you unlock one, ping the web, and you start pinging the whole network.
And that's pretty much exactly as. Do you know what? My Spider-Man is my favourite. I've even got one here. Look. and I, on a funny note, it is like a web. And when I broke that story, I tell you what, I cut a few of those webs down. And it's people like us, Ruth, that we will continue to do that to protect children. And one day the web will fall apart, the walls will fall apart, and our children will be protected in the future.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Andy. It's been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your story. And everyone, remember, this show is all about brain health, unchaining your pain. And even if you have pain from your past, from abuse that you've suffered, you still have the power to unchain it. And Andy has kindly been here to show us how. Do reach out to the police if you're concerned about anything. We'll post some links below where you can get in touch with organisations such as those that Andy mentioned. Andy, thank you so much for coming on your show, and looking forward to hearing the truths that come out in the future, because know the truth and the truth will set you free. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Ruth. Thank you.
You're most welcome.